Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here at my wormery and I've got a couple things on my checklist of stuff I want to take care of. If you're a regular here on my channel, you might recognize that down here is my VermiBag Mini, and when we're feeding VermiBag Mini, we're feeding European nightcrawlers. So my European nightcrawlers don't exist only in my VermiBag Mini. I've also got some in a plastic tub on the shelf behind me. They're both going to get fed today. There's a vast difference in the age of these two containers. This container here is now, what is it? Oh, 614 days of age, so it's getting up there. I've never harvested this bag. I have no idea what it's like to harvest a continuous flow-through system, but at some point soon I'm going to have to, and I believe I've kind of decided that I'm going to go 100 weeks. And it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's really the population in this container that's going to reach the age of 700 when I finally harvest this bag. The bag came later, so the worms in the container were originally reared inside of a little green tub, and then they went into a larger pink pot, and then eventually they got moved into this fairly good-sized container. But I've decided that I'm going to target day 700, which is, you know, at this point it's only about 3 months away, so it gives us a little bit more time to try to, you know, steer this in the right direction so that we end up with a really nice harvest. And then as far as the other container is concerned, at the age of 92 days, it's already 3 months of age, so I'm just gonna give that in a pretty much an everyday feeding. The other thing I've got out here, you can see on the bench, I've got a number of things: food, coffee, some coffee filters even as bedding. I've got a little something here in this bag. It's called lime. It's pulverized lime, and my main reason for wanting to include this in today's feeding in these two systems is because I've observed some little creepy crawly creatures, and I've been using this lime in my African nightcrawler systems, because in those systems too I've noticed some little creepy crawlies. So I'm going to see if this stuff might help a little bit. Super cheap. It was like a 40-pound bag, cost like $4. And it's supposed to help sort of stabilize the pH in your systems, which could potentially be the reason you see, you know, insects, and in my case I believe it's mites that I've got in here. Not as bad as we see in my African nightcrawler systems, but still I see them every time I go in there when I'm editing the video. So I figured I'm going to give each of these systems a little bit of this with today's feeding as well. So I'm going to put this glove on here and we can get to work. Oh shucks. You know, this glove right here has been lasting me for weeks and weeks and weeks of, I don't know, maybe even dozens of uses at this point. Without a hole, without tearing or anything. And right now while I was putting it on, the wristband snapped. Although, in a way, it's still holding up. I wonder if I can continue to use it. I don't know. We'll see. That might be a sign that this thing's almost at the end of its life. But what a great use I've gotten out of this pair of gloves. People have asked whether I toss each day's worth of used gloves in the trash or what I do. But I always reuse them. I wash them as if I'm washing my hands. But it is much easier to wash off the glove than it is to wash your hands. And that's one of the main reasons I like to wear the gloves. Cleanup is just much quicker, and in this case, these gloves have been lasting weeks and weeks and weeks. I love how the plastic coverings are keeping the moisture in. It's kind of nice to see nice damp material right at the top with worms at the surface. A lot of times the top surface is a little bit dry and inhospitable for the worms. Probably why you don't really see them hanging out on the edges where it is drier. But out here in the middle where it's nice and damp, it's kind of cool to just, you know, open the container and find worms hanging out there waiting to greet you. Alright, so there was a whole bunch of paper we found last time we fed. Last time we fed was a week ago, and we had taken a whole bunch of paper that was part of what was used as bedding under the feeding previously. This time I believe we had left a good pile of paper right on top. Yep. And I wondered what that would result in. But look at that, it's like chock full of worm castings. People often talk about how these nightcrawlers almost seem to prefer the bedding materials as opposed to the as opposed to the kitchen scraps and fresher foods. So here we, where was it? I just observed a mating pair of worms here. Always a good sign to see the worms in the process of mating. All right. So I like how this bedding topping over the food seemed to attract a good number of worms. I can imagine as the moisture of the feeding that was beneath it is trying to maybe work its way through the material and evaporate, that the paper right over it would just suck up a huge amount of it, making it into a spot that the worms really enjoy hanging out in. So I'm going to do exactly that again. I'm going to make sure that I pick out any pieces of paper I find, and at the end we'll take that paper collection and we'll place it right on top of the feeding again, because it did seem to work really nicely. Kind of what I was hoping for. It's pretty neat. Okay, a couple of those other numbers that you saw on the board that I didn't talk about alongside this bin, for example, it said 76. There was 76 feedings so far that this population has received. So if you can imagine this without all these little scraps of food from the past feeding, if you can just imagine all of the rest of it as just castings only over the course of what, a year and a half or so at this point, even more. It's the castings of 70 some odd feedings, all broken down. Some of it, sitting in here for over a year now. Well over a year. I'll have to start thinking about how to approach day 700 to make the harvest as successful as possible. It'll be interesting. People are probably saying, why are you waiting so long? Geez Louise, do it already. They're completely correct. I don't disagree. What is this? Ooh, just a chunk of coffee, I believe. We'll just sprinkle that over there. All right. Looks like we've given ourselves a pretty good space to drop in today's feeding. I've got these cone-shaped filters. In the past, my filters would kind of level out into a disc shape, into a flat, round piece of paper. But when these, these, unless you tear it down the crimped edge there, unless you do that, you're dealing with a shaped piece of paper as opposed to a flat sheet of paper. So instead of keeping these around, I've been pretty much using them. Sometimes they stack up. I get 3 or 4 in a little pile before the next time I have a chance to use them in my wormery. But now we're going to use up 4, I believe. We're going to use 1 for each handful. I like using this 2-handful approach to divvying out their rations. So when I loaded up that plastic tray, it was 4 handfuls of material that I plopped into it. So what remains here is still about another couple handfuls for the other system. This is probably a larger system, though. It's probably a lot more worms that need to be fed in here. But you saw that there was still scraps of leftovers of food from previous feedings. Now this stuff, this stuff is supposed to, affect the pH of the material in the bin. So rather than just focusing it into here with the feeding, as I was about to do, I'm going to hold off, and we're going to actually stir that in as we're kind of covering up today's feeding. We'll stir that stuff in. Then I believe it'll be a little bit more effective in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with it. If it is in fact an imbalance in the pH of the material in the bin, then the material in the bin in general is what needs to be treated with this stuff. So these are also scrap papers. I thought there was chunks of leftover food in here. Yeah, this is some sort of a chunk of leftover food from the previous feeding, although I don't really see much, if anything else, of the last feeding. Everything else seems to be paper scraps for the most part, which we've got a good collection of over here. It's going to be a nice topping for today's feeding too. So let's do that. Let's put all this nice paper right on top of the feeding. And you know what else we'll do now? We'll move on to the application of the lime. dirty a little bit there. Let's see if I can kind of hold on to half of it, keep it in the plastic bag, and we'll dump the other half out. Save about half for the other container. Let's start blending this stuff in a little bit here. I guess we'll see how deep we can sink some of it. This is my first application of lime in an attempt to try to impact the pH level of any of my bins. So I don't have any scientific information other than the presence of what appears to be mites. Since this is just really just a ground up stone-like material, I believe, limestone, it's really just seen as sort of a mineral, and I think the worms just see it as dirt, you know, they don't see it as a chemical or anything like that. It doesn't have any effect on them, really. Okay. Thought I saw chunks of lime kind of crumpled together, but these seem to be just pieces of bedding that have gotten a little extra lime attached to them. Okay. Curious to see what this will do. Kind of stirred up today's feeding. Let's see if we can keep it down low. Cover it up with some neighboring material. Alright. Well, I'm curious to see what this stuff does. I wonder what the deal is with the mites in here. Maybe I should have shot a little video in the beginning to see if I can spot some. But I see a lot of little white material out here. Oh, there's my glove as history. I was able to forecast it. Somehow I knew. Yeah, it looks to me like there's little white specks all over the place. I wonder if they're... possibly some of them are mites. So either way, whether or not it was needed, you know, I don't mind putting this stuff in. It was a cheap thing that we could try. It'd be kind of nice if it does work. I think the real telltale is going to be, you know, the number of mites that are in my other nightcrawler bins over in the African nightcrawler bins. But all right, as far as these gyros are concerned, this bin is fed. Let's get it covered up. Seems to me like this staggered approach of using one bag to pretty thoroughly cover 2 of the 4 walls, and then the other one positioned a little bit offset of the other one to cover up really thoroughly the other 2 edges right up the wall, and really try to limit the amount of evaporation that happens. I think this double plastic setup seems to be working really nicely. Let's go take care of the other container, get them fed too. Got ourselves a little welcome party. That's interesting to see too, them coming up through the hole there that they made for themselves, providing themselves with access to the spa area up here on the top floor. I only see 4 worms. Should be able to knock them off pretty easily. Not sure. Oh, I thought that was a worm. Maybe it is. It's hard to tell. Tiny one if it is, or maybe a pot worm or something. Yeah, this paper's holding up pretty good. If they start to really chew through it and it becomes hard to handle, I'll replace it. But for now, it's still holding up really good. I believe it's still pretty new. Paper is just completely drenched. Not a surprise to find worms on top of it when we get in here. I'm trying to remember how this was set up. I believe here too we made a pretty good collection of paper and scattered it across the feeding that we applied last time. I think there was this attempt to maintain consistency. Let's see what we have here. Pretty sure it was fed down the middle. I've been doing a little bit of what they call pocket feeding. Been going from corner to corner, feeding certain bins, but I don't think that's the case here. I believe it was just a simple feeding down the center. I believe after I'm done, I'm going to just mark where we fed with this coffee filter here. right. I definitely found scraps of paper here. So I believe we did do exactly what I thought, which was the same thing we just did, which is to use a whole bunch of this bedding that was scattered across the feeding previously to do the same thing again today. It's creating a real haven that the worms seem to be enjoying. There's a nice number of worms hanging out within it. Let me just sift through here really quick, see what I can salvage to reuse as bedding on top. This is one of the little burritos I made for them last week. They've almost emptied it. There's a couple scraps of food in here. Maybe they were just having a hard time getting at it. Maybe it was sort of folded over in half, so this way I can kind of leave it a little bit more exposed and easier for them to get at those bits. So why don't we do it that way? Kind of turn it inside out. What else do we have down here? A good chunk of melon, leftover food from last time, I believe. Yeah, you know, we're probably going to want to dig a pretty good size hole down in here to add today's feeding. Here's another package of leftovers. And all these little white specks reminds me right away, I wonder if some of this could be mites. Well, if you ask me, I think it's no harm in adding this stuff, even if it doesn't look that chronic. There's a little guy that took a ride on my brand new glove. Let's get them back down into the bin. But before we go any further, I think I am just going to do the addition of the lime really quick. We'll stir it in. I don't have a lot of room in this bin. It's kind of a cramped situation over here. So since we've collected a bunch of stuff off to the right, my right, I guess we can go ahead and do a little tilling up of the opposite side over on this side to get this lime mixed in. Just seeing if I can spot any other larger chunks that we can keep together with the rest of the leftovers. Yeah. So let's see. We'll see if we can get about half of it scattered in on this side. We'll save the rest for the other side. As I make my way through, I can feel the material's got a nice dampness to it, a nice moisture level. And you can see it too. Everything's got just the right amount of moisture. It's clearly not pooling up on the bottom, and it's not such that there's, you know, stuff just swimming in, you know, material. So there's no muddiness or anything like that either. So there's no nothing really getting all gooey or stuck to my gloves. My gloves are almost clean. I could just shake them off. 1, 2, 3. So the material's got pretty much the ideal moisture level. The only thing that would concern me though is the moisture is sometimes a reason that you end up with kind of pests too. Some of the pests really favor the damp conditions. Alright, let's do the same over on this side too. Drop in some of this garden lime or whatever this is. I think somebody said don't use garden lime. I don't think it is garden lime. I just, for whatever reason, called it that. It's just pulverized dolomite lime, as far as I remember from the container. This is not a very big container. How old was this thing again? 92 days, 3 months at this point, you know? So I've got sort of basic rules of thumb. It's most often the most dominant rule of thumb is just the capacity of the bin, treating some point as full. Some point prior to it actually reaching the upper rim though. it's a point where I still feel like I'm pretty comfortable that I can do stuff like this, you know, till the material around and kind of get the job done without worrying so much about possibly spilling it over the edge. So just enough room to be able to work easily without making a mess. So getting much deeper, getting this container much more full than this might not be a good idea. I think I am probably approaching the point where one of these days soon I'm going to just call it the last feeding and then start steering this thing towards harvest. Okay, we've opened up a nice big hole here to drop today's feeding into. Just spill it in. We've got a good amount of leftovers here. We can maybe take one of this week's burritos, and we'll see if we could find one of last week's burritos. Was this it over here? Hard to say. Let's see. Let's create another one here. A little bit of leftovers left in there. I believe the other one is right here. Right, big chunk of paper. Leftovers. This is a mango seed husk. Breaking away nicely. Just tear it to pieces. Not even going to recognize it as mango seed husk anymore. If I could just tear it up this way in between my fingers. So whatever, it's still tough material. It'll take a little bit more time. This is a nice feeding. Let's see if I can get the last of this stuff shaken out of this container here. It's not bad. It's a pretty intense, nice big hearty feeding. But before we can cover up, we're going to want to, oh yeah, let's not forget, I almost forgot to add the coffee. I guess because I was already thinking to myself what a nice generous feeding this is. Do they need more? Maybe not, but whatever. I'm not heading back upstairs with any leftover coffee. I'm giving it all to the worms. Alright, good job. Alright, now we've got ourselves a seriously generous feeding. Or maybe not. A lot of it was just leftovers. I'm sure they'll be working the leftovers probably a lot more readily than the freshly added food. All those leftovers have had at least a week now to, you know, start really getting infiltrated by microbes and bacteria and fungi and everything that the worms love. So this new stuff is going to be really palatable for them in a week or two after it's had a chance to start breaking down. It's all the really old, gooey, nasty stuff that they really favor the most, I believe. Alright, all kinds of good stuff in this bin. 92 days. Pretty nice age for a bin. A lot of the stuff that I'm kind of pushing around feels really clumpy. I can certainly see the stuff kind of, you know, turning into really nice, smooth, consistent castings. But right now it is all kinds of chunks of lumps of food and bedding and all kinds of stuff mixed together. And you name it. I think this bin will do really nice if at some point we just decide to not feed it any further and let the worms focus on what's in here now and break it all down for us. Alright, very nice. Let's mark where we just fed with our traditional feeding zone indicator. Sometimes I only notice afterwards that I actually already had one and it's just stuck to the newspaper, but I don't think that's the case here. Makes it official. This bin has a feeding zone indicator too now. Just like all the rest. Almost all the rest. I'm not sure we had one in the VermiBag Mini, did we? I don't think so. I don't know. There, it's pretty obvious. You're pretty much feeding down the middle every time in there. So, at day 92, this bin has now received its 14th feeding. It's these little numbers down here at the bottom, right? We talked about how the VermiBag Mini was receiving its 77th feeding today, earlier, and I guess the average interval between feedings on that container is 8.1 days. In this container, the average interval between feedings is 7.1 days. And after the feeding we just gave it today, it's now up to its 14th feeding. So we're good to go. The European night crawlers have been fed, and we've even gone ahead and we've taken some measures to see if we can affect the pH balance in this container to possibly reduce the number of creepy crawlies that we see in here. So we've only got a few things to put away and not much to clean up, as you can see. But before I head off to take care of that, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.